Washington, D.C., the nation's capital, the seat of federal power, and increasingly a town that is very rich. The local Native Americans named the river Potomac, which means where goods are offloaded or where tribute is paid. Today, that tribute comes in the form of trillions of dollars of taxpayer money that floods into this city every year. While 1 out of every 6 Americans worries about where their next meal is coming from, Washington, D.C. has the highest rate of fine wine consumption in the United States. While 1 out of 4 Americans has a mortgage that is underwater, 7 of the 10 wealthiest counties in the United States are counties around this region. Washington, D.C. now has the highest per capita income in the entire United States. They just passed Silicon Valley. You're going to discover that Washington, D.C., a town that used to be a town of sleepy bureaucrats, is now a town of Maserati dealerships, fine wines, luxurious homes, and luxurious shops. It's a Washington, D.C. that a lot of people never see when they take their tours or they go to the museums. But it's the Washington, D.C. that reflects the reality of our country today. The great American writer F. Scott Fitzgerald once wrote that the rich are different from you and me. America's previous boom towns became wealthy because they produced something. San Francisco during the gold rush, Abilene, Texas, cattle, and of course Detroit during the heyday of the American automobile. All of those boom towns became very wealthy in their time because they created something new. This boom town, its wealth comes from extracting it from the rest of the country. Boomtown is something that no one in Washington wants to talk about. When they do, they tend to blame the other side. But the reality is today that in Washington, D.C., the business is not politics. The business is money.
And joining us now, Peter Schweitzer and filmmaker Steve Bannon. Great work. Good to see you. We're gonna really open up a can of worms here tonight.
Yeah.
All right. So, Washington, D.C., 3 of the wealthiest counties in the country, 7 of the top 10?
Yes, that's right. That's right. And this is the thing that people don't realize about Washington, D.C. We think of it as a seat of federal power. Politics reigns supreme, but it's a business. There's a business model there. And it really what exists is what we call the permanent political class. We think of Republicans and Democrats, and there are philosophical differences, but at the end of the day, they're all primarily looking for a way to make money. And you don't make money by shrinking government, you make money by growing government.
You know, you made some comparisons. 1 in 6 Americans in poverty, 1 in 4 Americans, their mortgages are underwater, meaning they can't even get their way out of their house without losing.
This is the great unreported story of our time right now, because this is extraction. The rest of the country is in a financial and economic crisis. Much of the country is almost in a depression. And yet you have Washington with the 3 richest counties bordering it, 7 of the top 10. The big number, per capita income, is now higher than Silicon Valley, the great technology engine of the United States. It's the 4th city generating millionaires.
No,
you look at every
4th fastest.
The 4th
city.
fastest. If you look at every statistic about people and incomes, Washington, D.C., and the reason is because you have a massive federal budget that gets allocated through there.
Well, and it goes a little bit deeper, Steve, and you're right on all of these points, and those statistics should wake people up. But isn't it, a lot of this is built in? It's like a pyramid scheme because they have baseline budgeting. Every budget, every area of government goes up 6, 7, 8% a year, even though we're still borrowing nearly 50 cents of every dollar they spend.
That's right. And Sean, what's interesting is it's not only the allocation of federal dollars, but there's a lot of money that comes into Washington to determine how that money is going to be allocated. So you've got taxpayer money, you've got special interests putting money in Washington, D.C. to influence the process, to steer money in their way. It is a town awash with cash. And the sad reality is that it's only going to get worse. It's not going to get better.
One of the arguments that I have made, as the president has so successfully used the class warfare arguments as he has, it's interesting. It seems that the politicians are the ones that are greedy, selfish, power hungry. They build up their power by granting people government programs, spending other people's money. How come they've never got tagged as being greedy and selfish as they now steal from our kids' piggy banks?
I think no one's ever turned the camera on them. I think that's what we intend to do. We're going to look at this, and this is a bipartisan problem. This is just not a beat down on Democrats, although they are the party of big government. This is a permanent political class that is now kind of formed an aristocracy. And that aristocracy, that's why nothing changes in Washington. That's why you have these budget debates. And like you said, you're talking about cuts in growth rates of budgets, not cut in the budget itself. It's not a downside. They never cut it. And the reason, as you can tell, they've really extracted money through taxes and then the ability to borrow for their lifestyles. In addition, there's no pressure on them to really cut. They really control Wall Street. It's not the money controls Washington. Washington controls the money. They have an industrial logic to this business model, just like any other business model, and that is to extract power from the rest of the country and money into a centralized location, which is Washington.
You know, you mentioned in your piece, Peter, about Maserati dealerships and fine wines and expensive restaurants and the home prices, et cetera. Yeah. Are these government employees that are buying the Maseratis?
It's probably not government employees. It's people that influence government policies. So it's people like lobbyists, people that are in government relations, people that run contracting firms who really their businesses whose only client or only customer is the federal government. So it's money that gets sloshed around in all those different ways. And the reality is that, you know, I lived in Washington, D.C. in the 1980s. It was really kind of a middle-class town with some wealthy areas. It's a completely different place now. And part of it is the size of the federal budget has grown enormously, and of course they take the cut of everything that comes out. So,
and what are they producing? You're right. We talked about an oil boom, gold rush, cattle, et cetera, and all these other. They've produced something. What is Washington producing except record debts, record deficits, and telling old people we're gonna means test your Social Security. We're gonna raise the retirement age to about 1 hour before you die, so you'll get at least an hour's worth of what you've paid into your whole life.
Well, that's it. The whole point. They have a business model. That business model is government, and it's bigger government. And as long as they have the ability to borrow, right? As long as they can take tax receipts and borrow, they're going to continue to do that. And so that's why you're seeing now we're trying to put the camera on this business model, let you see the lifestyles of the rich and powerful.
We have a lot more to get to tonight, guys. Stay right.
Washington, D.C. is America's boomtown, and like any boomtown, it needs to have its own aristocracy. In Washington, D.C., we think of politics in terms of red and blue, Democrat and Republican, but here, the color that really matters is green. We think about political parties and you think about political affiliations, but what really matters in Washington, D.C. is power affiliation. And by power affiliation, you're talking about access to political power and access to public officials. And that comes through lobbying.
Whatever law, whatever bill is trying to be passed, it may adversely impact an industry. There's a legislative team for the association and their industry that represent. Fortunately for chauffeur transportation, there's no parking on the Hill. So we're able to provide chauffeur transportation to make sure that they can get to the Hill in a timely manner to sell their vision. There were 100 new House members at one time in the 2010 cycle. And what that means is that every association has to come back to make sure that everything's cool, right? We're okay. You still supporting my bill? Thank you for your support. And they get off the Hill. So it's really been great for us in that respect.
Lobbying takes place right here on K Street. This is the epicenter of all of it. It's in full view of the White House and with the U.S. Capitol not far away. And when it comes to spending money, large amounts of money are spent here to influence decision makers. It's a distinctly bipartisan activity. In fact, that's the best way to do it. So you have, for example, a Republican like former Senator Trent Lott, who partners with a Democrat, former Senator John Breaux. The political debates that we see oftentimes are a little bit like professional wrestling. It's not always what it appears to be. And let it not be said that in Washington, D.C., that they don't believe in family values, because to become part of this aristocracy, oftentimes the best way to do it is either to marry into it or to be born into it. And it's remarkable how many members of Congress have family members who are registered lobbyists. So consider, for example, Congressman Bill Young from Florida, who's been in office since 1971. He's the head of a very powerful subcommittee that controls spending on defense. He has a daughter-in-law who's a registered lobbyist. Since 2000, she has lobbied on one issue and done so very successfully. It's, as you would probably guess, on defense spending. Or consider the case of Senator Harry Reid, the majority leader, Democrat from Nevada. He actually has several family members who have been registered lobbyists. He has a son who has lobbied on behalf of several groups and secured $50 million in earmarks. He also has another son who's involved in a $5 billion venture involving a Chinese effort to develop an energy project in the desert of Nevada. In that particular case, the majority leader took a personal interest and helped to push it through. So just remember, when you see the professional wrestling in Washington, D.C., it's not so much red and blue, it's really green, the color that really matters.